my personal experience with cancer did indeed get my attention, let's put it that way. My mother died when I was about 10 years old of lymphoma, and I was with her when she passed away. And shortly thereafter, two of her brothers died of cancer, one of melanoma, the other of lung cancer. And so I got to see kind of the ravages of conventional therapies. So I always wanted to do something about cancer, but I didn't really know how. And I would say I went into immunology because I was fascinated by immunology. You know, I got these T cells, and they were just discovered when I was in college. And these cells go all over your body, and they go through your tissues, and they can detect when something's there that ought not to be there. And then they eliminate it. And, you know, how they do that, at the time, there was nothing known about it. And so I've spent the last almost 40 years now trying to figure that out. But my approach was, if I could really figure that out, then maybe we could use the knowledge that somewhere along the way to think about cancer, going back and treating cancer. And so that's the way I approached it. I didn't, in a way, I was doing the work with the idea of ultimately treating cancer, but I was really doing it because I wanted to know how T cells work. So it was fundamental research I was interested in, not necessarily the cancer aspect, but I was aware, always aware that it was there. You know, if I could just figure out enough to be smart enough to come up with a new way to do it. After we first got into clinical trials, I mean, I'd cured a lot of mice, right, in my laboratory with my own hands. And when you cure mice, they bite you and stuff. They're not grateful at all, put it that way. Of course, we gave them the cancer in the first place, so I guess that's not wrong. But to me, after we started, I could sort of figure out what was going on, understand that it was a good thing, but it was mostly numbers to me at first. And then when I had the chance to meet the first patient, which was about 2006, actually it was 2004, anyways, in that era, it really changed everything. There's a patient named Sharon Belvin, and she was 22 years old when she was diagnosed with metastatic melanoma, which is basically a death sentence at that time. She had just finished college, gotten engaged, you know, and wanted to start her life, and bam, you know, she gets this diagnosis. And so she started on ipilimumab, and within a few months, her tumors were completely gone. And I met her when her doctor called me, it's in New York, and called me and said, I've got a patient who wants to meet you. You know, she told him, the guy who invented this is here, you ought to meet him. And so she did. So anyway, I went over to the outpatient clinic and walked into this room with her doctor, and she and her husband and her parents, you know, and it was just, let's put it this way, it was a life-changing moment. It really, that's when it first, you know, really became clear to me that exactly what was going on. And I've followed her since then. She's 14 years out now and has almost 15, I guess. Anyway, has two just beautiful children. And you know, she told me several years ago, you know, she said, they tell me I have this chronic disease, you know, but I have to keep an eye on it. She said, I'm to hell with melanoma. You know, I'm done with melanoma. I'm cured. I'm going to live my life like I'm cured. And that's when it really, you know, caused me to think a lot about, this isn't just a cancer therapy. This is a way of liberating people from, you know, just the burden of having always every day to be thinking about the fact that you've got this disease that could come back and kill you. So you're always looking over your shoulder, you know. And that's what she taught me, is that, you know, that takes a bigger toll on patients than I'd imagined, you know. And here, you know, a lot of people don't like to, you know, a lot of clinicians don't want to say that. And I think you do have to be careful, because you don't want to give people, you know, unwarranted optimism about what's happening. But the statistics on thousands of patients now say if you make it 4 years, and this is just metastatic melanoma, you're probably going to be good for 10 or more, So people will just quit worrying about it and get on with their lives. The main impact of our work is to show that you can effectively get your own immune system to attack cancer. It's a very radical departure from the conventional types of cancer therapies, which are radiation, surgery, and chemotherapy, all of which are designed to either remove or kill the cancer cells. What we do has really very little to do with the cancer cell. What I figured out was a molecule that's involved in stopping T cells responses. When you respond to bacteria or cancer or anything, you've got to generate a huge amount of T cells. So we worked out this pathways by which they get started, but then you've got to stop them at some point, or they can damage your body. We had the idea maybe that's why we don't deal well with cancer, why the immune system doesn't deal well with cancer, and it's one particular molecule. I thought, well, if we can inactivate that, it's kind of like the brakes, and you disable the brakes, and just let the thing keep going for a while. But it has nothing to do with cancer. We're not treating the cancer. So it's really revolutionized how you go about treating cancer, where you go in with chemicals or with radiation, try to kill every last tumor cell, and that's all you can do. But the immune system gives you a way of getting your own T cells to attack the cancer. And again, the kind of cancer, by and large, you don't have to design a different therapy for every cancer, let's put it that way. And once you've got the T cells, you've got them for the rest of your life. And so if the cancer comes back, it can immediately, rejuvenate, and these memory cells can then go after the cancer. So fundamentally, it's completely different than conventional therapies. But the great thing about it is that it's now become clear that immunotherapy is the fourth pillar of cancer therapy. But unlike the other three, it can work with them. You can combine it. And what it's going to do, I think, in the next few years, it's starting now, so this is going to happen pretty rapidly, is as people begin to reevaluate radiation, reevaluate genomically targeted therapies and radiation, and realize you don't have to kill every cancer cell. You can just give enough to kill some cancer cells, whatever the treatment is, and maybe get away from all the adverse events that are associated with those kinds of therapy, and give them the benefits, such as memory, of immunotherapy. And I think, as I say, that's beginning to happen in lung cancer, is the best example so far. And I think that's going to be happening more and more, and I think they're going to be really rapid developments pretty soon. But the main thing is, again, getting durable responses instead of just giving somebody several months or several years, or switching drugs and approaches. I mean, it's not to say that nothing worked at all until this came along. That's not true. Even if drugs didn't work by themselves, in many kinds of cancer, you could just keep changing them and still keep people alive for long periods of time. But that's not the same as actually curing them. I became committed to science, although it was before I was in the 8th grade, I think, that because I was always like to have my microscope and chemistry set and just mess around, and I liked figuring out things. And my dad was a doctor, so I was on the way, I was just for a while being a little torn, but basically assuming I was going to be a doctor. And so I started college as a pre-med major. But I'd had this experience after my junior year in high school. I participated in a science program at the University of Texas at Austin, where, as a high school student, we had lectures in the mornings from just fantastic biology teachers, and then worked in labs in the afternoon. And that was just, for me, it was like heaven. It was just so much fun, and I just said, this is what I want to do. And I like to tell a story that, I was thinking about it after I matured a little bit and thought, as a doctor, as treating people, you have to fill your head with facts, just an incredible number of facts, and have them in there so that when a patient presents to you with a particular set of symptoms, that you develop an algorithm to treat them, and you better be right, because if you're wrong, at the very least, you don't hurt anybody, But as a scientist, you're supposed to be wrong. You're supposed to be testing, questioning. Say, how does this work? Does it work this way? And then you do something. And if you can figure it out easily and you're right every time, you're probably working on boring stuff. That's, So, if you're right in a big way, a few times a year, a few times a decade, for really big stuff, that's enough. And so that's the key, is to be able to identify, I think, important questions and follow the experiments down the road. If you're wrong, you just keep going. You just learn something, learn more. Every experiment teaches you something, and so hopefully you get to the point where, you've got something that you can't prove it's wrong. As a student, I think I had a pretty strong will. Not that I was studious or particularly disciplined in my approach to science, but his approach to my studies. But I think I was inquisitive and creative enough that, I got in trouble a lot at school, and one big one was when, after my experience at the University of Texas in the summer, working in a laboratory taking biology, I came back and I'd known about evolution, but really having been exposed to this class, realized how fundamental the ideas of Darwin about selection were just fundamental to understanding biology. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of trees, phyla, species, all this stuff, family, kingdom, all this, and that's a way of organizing it, but it's not a way that helps you understand. But the principles of selection can help you understand how things work and how things got to where they're going, and then better yet, give you a worldview where you can begin to predict what's going to happen in the future. And so I refused to take the high school course because it didn't have evolution in it. For religious reasons, they didn't teach it. And I said, well, I'm not going to take the course. And anyway, it was quite a sort of playing chicken with the school, because they said, you have to take it because you need it to graduate. I said, well, I'm not going to waste my time on memorizing kingdom, phyla, and all that stuff. And so they finally relented and let me take biology from the University of Texas again by correspondence. So, I fought my way to getting the proper training. One would be Barry Kiddo, who was I worked with as an undergraduate and a graduate student, getting my bachelor's degree and my PhD, who taught me, something about how to do science, and sort of instilled in me that, we do science because we have to, and we should do things that benefit mankind, to pay him back for allowing us to have all this fun. And then I guess the other would be Lloyd Old again, for giving me insight into how you really connect laboratory science with treating people, and how you need to view every patient as a source of information, and they shouldn't be wasted by not doing everything you can to understand why a drug worked or why a drug didn't work in that patient. Something that Pam Sharma has the same feelings about, which is why I think we work so good together, as we're really after the same thing eventually. But one of the things that we both believed in and was that it's not enough just to do a clinical trial and look at clinical signals. you need to do science. You need to, dissect what's going on, to get tissue specimens of the cancer and the blood, and just look at what's happening with respect to immune cells, and so that you know what the mechanism of what you're doing is, because we know that only a fraction of patients actually respond to these things, at least when they're given one at a time. But she worked a very clever way called pre-surgical therapy, pre-surgical trials, where patients that have local disease are getting the drugs before they go to surgery. And then you get the whole organ to dissect and study and just start generating amazing data from it. And so we started collaborating on some of that work, and gradually started writing grants together and sort of grew out of that. So now we work together. We've each got our own labs, but we run a big operation called the Immunotherapy Platform at MD Anderson, where we've got about almost 70 people that work for us in that group. The whole goal of it is to study what's going on in patients. Right now we're involved in about 115 trials, all very diverse types of cancer, very diverse immunological drugs, and also working with pharmaceutical companies to bring us the newest drugs, and work with us maybe from stuff that hasn't even been in humans yet, to do the right mouse experiments to learn about it. And I think it's unique in the world, actually, and we're generating what I think being just very, very important data, and have made some progress on enhancing the effectiveness of immunotherapeutic approaches, for example, in kidney cancer, and pretty soon perhaps in prostate cancer, where it hasn't really worked up until now. Found out that I'd gotten the award in a pretty strange way. For some reason, the committee didn't know how to get a hold of me, and so I think we were in New York. I think about 5:30 New York time, the phone rang, and I went, "Wow!" But it was my son, and he was watching the press conference broadcast, and said, "Dad, you want it? You want it?" And so that's how I found out. It was actually about an hour and a half later before I got the official word. And some people realized what was going on and heard on television that they were having trouble locating me. So one of the public relation guys from where I work called them and said, "Hey, this is his cell phone number." So that was a pleasure, getting word from my son. Several of my friends, we were at a meeting of cancer immunotherapy people, and there were, 2,000 to 3,000 people there. And so really a lot of my very closest friends and people I've worked with for 3 or 4 decades were there. And so the word began to spread even at that early hour of the morning, and people somehow got their hands on bottles of champagne. And so by about 6:30, there were about, 15 people in our hotel room celebrating. Well, there are a lot of points when people question your research. I mean, I've been through several episodes of that. And first is, before you say anything, you should be pretty sure you're right. You shouldn't just go out there on a limb, unless you want to, but unless somebody, if you're wrong, is going to prove you wrong sooner or later. So you should be the first one to do that. But I think that I've gotten into controversies before, and if I'm convinced enough that I'm on the right track, I pretty much ignore them. I'll argue about it at meetings and stuff enough, but I just keep going and go the next step and just keep building on it. I don't get hung up and thinking and worrying. You just try to do it so when you get in a position of having an argument, you're confident enough that you're correct. You've done that experiment that tells you there's no other explanation except the one you got. And if anybody challenges you, they better have that one too. I guess my greatest achievement in science so far in life would be, I think, well, there's been a number of them in figuring out details of work, but I think it is the realization that what this molecule CTLA-4 did. You know, I didn't discover the molecule, it was discovered by others, but its function was unknown for a long time, and the first function that was proposed, we showed was incorrect. It was, in just simple terms, it was thought to be another positive, you know, like another gas pedal, and we showed, no, it's the brakes. And then to take that and say, okay, now we can treat cancer. I'm a musician, but I don't know about highly accomplished. I have fun at it, but yeah, ever since I was a kid, I've loved music. I tried to learn the guitar and piano and stuff like that, but it was always beyond me. I just couldn't put up with it. At some point, I picked up the harmonica, which is very easy to play, a very visceral instrument, you know, and so I started playing for fun, and then teamed up with. When I was doing my postdoctoral studies in San Diego, I teamed up with some Texas expats who were there and played honky-tonk music at country and western bars around San Diego County, California. And then they went professional, you know. But anyway, I still played for fun, listening to records. And then at an immunology meeting, maybe 12 years ago, somebody spread the word at this conference to, you know, anybody who has this musical instrument, bring them, and we'll get together and just play. And it was an odd assortment of music, a couple of guitars and keyboards and a harmonica and a trombone, you know, and a lot of other, you know, things. Anyway, we just had a lot of fun, but three of us, a keyboard player and a guitar player, just really had a particular time, you know, good time playing. And so after a few years, we started putting together a band, fairly serious, and I called the checkpoints. After immune checkpoint blockade, everybody in the band is either a physician or a scientist working in that field. And so we've been playing ever since, and mostly playing sort of advanced amateurs, I guess, you know, mostly at conferences where people are there. We do fundraisers for cancer charities and things like that. I played with Willie Allison several times. He's been one of my favorite musicians and just people, you know, for 40 years or more. And I've had a chance to play with him now several times. The most notable was sitting in with them briefly at the Austin City Limits Festival a few years ago, when there were 70,000 people in the audience. And it was pretty remarkable walking out in front of that many people. I think there are similarities between science and music. I mean, in both, you try to build a team that works. Each person has its own contribution and you know, their own part of the overall work to do. And hopefully, you know, all of us see the big picture as well, but people take care of their own individual thing. And when a good science team is working, it's kind of like a good band where you can communicate just with a, you know, gesture of the head or a wink or something, and you know, just know when the other person knows exactly what's going on. And so, but it's the communication. Every now and then my lab has been so well tuned, it feels like a really good band, you know, where it's just going to go where it's going to go without any conscious leadership. It's just, you know, everybody doing what they're supposed to do. I think to be a successful scientist, of course, you need to, you know, have a high degree of intelligence and discipline. After all, science involves making hypotheses and testing them. As I said, most of the time you're wrong. And one thing that a lot of people miss too. And you have to, especially young people, you have to really get the symptoms. And even after you do that, it's kind of tedious because you finally get it all together. Then you got to do it all again at least twice more to make sure it's reproducible, you know. And so, you know, you can't skip that step just because something happens once. You can't, you know, you got to do it all. So you just got to be able to persevere. But at the same time, know when you're going down the wrong track. And so it takes discipline, but creativity. You've got to learn how to, you know, view your data as a crystal or something, you know, where you look at every facet of it, get to know it from every direction, and, you know, look at what it tells you beyond the reason that you did the experiment to figure it out. And so I think that's pretty much it. It's the ability to really study the data and really learn what it's telling you in order to avoid keep doing experiments that just are going to give you results that are consistent with what you think you should get. Your job is really to turn that on its head and say, I want to design the experiment that it can't, you know, there's no other explanation except one from this experiment, and design it to try to prove yourself wrong. And try hard, not just the easy ones, you know, that are consistent, but the killer experiment. And I think it's the ability to recognize those and seek those rather than just the easy stuff. Yeah, well, what the War of Cancer became very shortly after it was conceived of was to really do basic science on understanding what causes cancer. You know, what are the lesions, the genetic lesions, and, you know, what are the circuits and everything. And the ultimate goal was to design drugs to hit those things. And the one thing that came out of it is you can't cure cancer doing that because cancer cells are inherently unstable in their genomes. You can come up with a drug that treats one of those lesions, but there'll already be another one there that your drug doesn't hit. And so it's, but I think now where there are cases where, you know, the tumor will almost disappear. They never really, or very, very rarely with the drugs that came out of the official war on cancer, ever really kill all the cancer cells. But again, you don't need to kill all of them when you're treating with immunotherapy. You can use them like vaccines to kill the drugs that have the right lesion. And so they can be used to form the basis of a really more individualized approach to cancer therapy, where you study what's going on, treat them with the right drug, be it standard chemotherapy or the genomically targeted drugs, and then come in with immunotherapy. What's next is working with Pam Sharma, and you know, right now in some cancers like metastatic melanoma, combinations of checkpoint blockers will give, you know, long-lived, you know, pretty durable responses. We don't know how long because it hadn't been enough time yet, but it looks like about 60%. And this is pretty good because when we started on this, if you were diagnosed with metastatic melanoma, the median life expectancy was 11 months. And no drug had ever lengthened that. And so now we know 60% of people are going to get 4 years, you know, and we'll see, it may be more. But so we need to get that to 100%. In other cancers, it may be 30% or something. So we need to just, you know, what I call raise the tail. If you look at a survival curve, you know, something like melanoma or other lethal cancers, you know, we start at 100%, and with time it drops down to some level. It used to go to 0 at some point, and you could just move the median over with treatments. But now we know that the survival curve flattens out at some level, some point. But we need to get that as high by doing the right combinations, as close to 100% as we can. And then other cancers, notably pancreatic cancer and glioblastoma, really haven't responded at all. And so we need to keep working very hard with those. Again, not by just throwing random combinations of things, but doing the science. You know, treat them with something. If it fails, it fails. But look and see why it failed, what didn't happen, You know, I mean, it's easy if it works, you know, to figure out why it worked. It's not so easy if it didn't work, but figuring out why it didn't work can help you make it work, you know, and that's something that's being missed. And so that's our passion, that's our goal right now, is to just, we know we can benefit a lot of patients. I think overall it is 20 to 25% of all cancer patients. We'd like to get that up, you know, as high as we can get it.